Hi, I'm John W. Sheldon. Welcome to Starting in the Middle, Episode 1. This week I'm going to talk to you a little bit about an illustration I'm doing, or specifically about the photo reference that I'm building and lighting for this illustration. I'm doing this photo reference for an illustration for my Patreon campaign called the Uncommon Adventure Gallery. This particular illustration was developed from is being developed from a concept approved by my backers there, and you can follow the link that I'm going to put right about here somewhere, or down in the doobly-doo in order to check out the campaign and get involved in the future if you're interested. But that's sort of on the side for this issue. I'm just going to run you through what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, and sort of how I built this modular little model here. So this illustration, like the last several from the Uncommon Adventure Gallery, has been developed from haiku submitted to me by my friends on Google+. I review all the haiku that my friends submit to me, and any of them that inspire me I develop into a quick thumbnail. And then I put up the thumbnails on a Google+ community where my Patreon backers vote on which one will get developed into the final illustration. So you might be wondering why I use photo reference when I'm doing fantasy illustrations and any other number of genre illustrations. And one of the reasons is because it's sort of a habit I got into when I was in art school. One of my illustration professors, Mark Bender, was a fan of the phrase or quote, "Draw from real life, but don't be limited by reality." He pretty strongly advocated using photo reference for everything you draw, even if you're drawing something utterly fantastical. Because photo reference can really help you get lighting and proportion correct to the extent to which you want to get those things correct. Once I knew which concept I was going to be developing into a final illustration, I had to figure out how I was going to get my photo reference. Several of the concepts you saw would probably be best served by doing a Google image search for some of the elements of the illustration. Some of them I'd certainly be shooting the figures using friends, family, or even myself and a remote for the camera. But for this image, I needed architecture. And this type of architecture is, we'll say, not exactly common around the city of Pittsburgh. Even less common to have it available to me to control the lighting. So I decided that I'd build some scale models. I say scale pretty generously, however, because I didn't go into it with any specific measurements in mind. All I did was actually took a cardboard box and cut it using a straight edge and a T-square, so I'd have nice square edges all around. And the rest of it is constructed with good old-fashioned Elmer's glue and paper. Everything's joined together pretty much as you see on this piece. And most of the pieces that will be in the final shot have been covered over with graph paper. Graph paper is useful to me when I'm doing this for two reasons. The first reason being it's much lighter in color than the cardboard itself, so it'll show highlights and show shadows a little bit more starkly than the plain brown cardboard would. Second, it disguises the fact that I've used a couple different types of cardboard. This chipboard back here is a different material than the cardboard right there. I used the chipboard here because it's much more flexible and much easier to get that arc. And the graph paper also has the actual structure of the lines on it. This is good for me when I'm looking at the perspective of the final photo. It lets me see exactly where I should be adding details and gives me good lines to follow, especially on these rounded objects. So if I want to project a shadow onto here, I've got a frame of reference for how it's going to wrap around, even if in the actual final photo reference that shadow doesn't exist yet. In addition to using just some simple cardboard boxes that I had lying around and graph paper and Elmer's glue to accomplish this, these towers, the main body of them, is actually made out of these pretty thick walled, solid, tubed packing tubes. And these packing tubes, obviously made great structure for this. For the top of these towers, where I've got this wraparound structure, These aren't individual pieces. This is actually a single piece of corrugated cardboard that wraps all the way around, and these slits in it that I've put in are just to make it flexible so it will be able to get wrapped around the cardboard packing tube. And all I did to generate this whole structure, all of these different parts, is I just looked at what I had in my thumbnail. So the concept called for these two towers on either side of this arch structure with a door in it. So I actually started by building the door. This was the first thing I made. It was originally one piece, and I actually added the cut down the middle so that we could get some light spill through, potentially. I might end up blocking that back up. We'll see. And I've got a couple small pieces of modeling wire standing in for the bars on these gates here. I cut these mostly by eyeballing the size, so I just knew that for a model that I'd be able to shoot on the surfaces I had, with the camera I have, with the lighting materials I have, this was about as wide as I'd want the gate to be, so I just eyeballed that. And I actually got this width because it was the width of a roll of duct tape I happened to have. So I used the roll of duct tape to trace the top half of the arc, and that determined the width of the doors. And I used that same roll of duct tape to trace the arc here, and cut that into this piece of cardboard. And then I added this backing piece of chipboard that's actually part of the insert from a case of beer. Almost everything I've used in this video is readily available in most people's homes. Most people have cardboard boxes, packing tubes, that sort of thing around. Luckily, you can go to almost any office supply store to pick up everything else I've used here. So office supply stores are going to have your standard Elmer's glue for back to school supplies. Office supply stores are going to have the box cutters that I use to cut everything here with. So it's just a standard regular box cutter. No special crafting supplies needed. And I even just used Elmer's glue to stick the graph paper down, and they sell pads of graph paper at office supply stores as well. So anywhere you've got an office supply store, you've got everything you need. If you don't have these kind of heavy-duty packing tubes around the house, if you need to build a cylindrical tower or something, they've got those at the office supply stores as well in their shipping department. And if you want smaller tubes, I was originally looking at just the tube from the inside of a paper towel roll, but I ended up wanting something a little bit thicker, so I went with this packing tube. The only thing that I've really used in this construction that most people don't either have laying around the house or isn't instantly available at any office supply store is actually this this wire here. Almost any craft supply store is going to have this. They're going to call it modeling wire or jeweler's wire or something like that. It's just a shiny, thin gauge, soft wire that's really easy to cut with, the snips on any pair of old needle nose pliers. So nice and easy to find, easy to use, and most importantly, very inexpensive. This whole model build cost me effectively pennies because I already had most of the supplies laying around the house. The cardboard just came from things that had been shipped to me over time, so we just saved the boxes and used it for this. The only thing that actually was sort of an expendable is the graph paper I've cut up here and the wire, and there's just a few short lengths of wire and 3 or 4 pages of graph paper, so nice and cheap. As I mentioned before, the whole reason I'm doing this is primarily to get lighting reference. That's sort of the most difficult thing to kind of accurately reproduce. So I built this model so that I could light it. If I weren't so concerned about how the lighting looks, I could have just drawn something that looks like this with a ruler. It's not that hard. But in order to make sure I get the lighting correct and have the shadows wrap around these round towers correctly, have it light inside the gates correctly, I've actually built this model with the idea of being able to light it, which is why you might notice I've cut these little holes inside the sides of the arch. those match the positions in the original concept thumbnail of torches that are inside the gateway lighting the door. In my photo reference, the part of those torches is going to be played by a string of Christmas lights. So this string of Christmas lights is actually going to give me the lights I need to run as torches. So I'm going to do a quick experiment between now and when I set it up to figure out which of these bulbs gives me the correct intensity of light. I have a hunch it's going to be either the blue or the red. They tend to be the dimmest bulbs. And what I actually need, because it's such a small confined space, is relatively dim lighting. But as you can see, the bulb actually fits through here pretty snugly and just pokes through, hopefully to about the scale that I want for the torches. When you're lighting really small models, you don't have a lot of options that are both cheap and readily available. For instance, this model still needs an exterior light source, like to represent the sun or the moon, so I'm just going to use a standard household lamp for that. And that'll be kind of above and behind the model when we actually shoot it. But as far as kind of miniaturized lighting that you want to have in the middle of a model, Christmas lights are probably your best bet. Luckily, they're really inexpensive, especially if you buy them shortly after Christmas. You can get a string of pure white LEDs, which are great for lighting small-scale stuff, for just a couple dollars. Now, most of the time, I actually prefer to shoot full-scale photo reference. It's easier. You can just control the lighting by, in many cases, moving a lamp or going outside and using the sun, because the sun's a nice universal light source. Good for any period of photography you're doing, or for any period or genre of illustration virtually. But failing that, sometimes, like in this case, you're shooting architecture that just doesn't exist where you are. So you have to adapt, do a little bit of model building. After I had everything built and I knew how I needed to shoot because I knew how the thumbnail looked, I went ahead and positioned everything, all the model elements, on the table here behind me, and I set up my lighting. Lighting in this case, as I showed you earlier, involved the Christmas lights and the lamp that's on behind me. Just the single bulb though, so I can get that strong directional light I like to have in most of my illustrations. So I waited until it was completely dark so I didn't have to worry about covering over all the windows and completely controlling the light. So I just waited until it was completely dark outside, turned off all the normal lighting in the room so I could just have the 3 definitive light sources that I wanted. The 2 little Christmas lights and the 1 bulb on the lamp. And I positioned the camera exactly as I needed to for the thumbnail and took the picture. After I shoot my reference, I usually take it into Lightroom or Photoshop and adjust the values a little bit. Just make sure it captures exactly what I'm looking for in lighting reference, or for the figure, I might, if I'm just shooting figure reference, I might do something like adjusting the contrast so that I can really clearly see everything that I need to see, really clearly get all the details out of the image that I need to be able to see to draw my final picture. And sometimes, if I'm working in something like, if I'm doing the piece as a digital painting, I might actually take it into Photoshop or into Krita and actually use it as a background layer and paint directly over it to get the final composition. If I'm not working in Krita or Photoshop and I'm working with it as a traditional media work, I usually still end up printing the picture out instead of just leaving it on a screen, because there's a different quality of luminance between a backlit image and a printed image. And I find it sometimes easier to work off the printed image, in part because it gives you additional options like throwing a piece of vellum over it to trace portions of it if you need to trace portions of it, or shading directly over it so that you can be sure you're matching tones and gradations. So I think there's a lot of advantages if you're working traditionally to have photo reference that's also printed out on solid media, so that you're not getting the same kind of difference in luminance that you get from looking at it looking at it on a backlit screen, especially if you're using multiple different screens and multiple different devices. Each one of them is going to have a different color cast. Each one of them is going to have a different luminance level. So things can get a little bit odd, especially if you start working on the painting at home and continue at an office, or start working on it in one room and continue on it in another using a different screen. So unless you really have the resources to spend to get all your screens perfectly calibrated, and I certainly don't, I really think it's better to work from solid media, which might mean taking it to a decent printer and spending $4 or $5 to get a printed copy of your photo reference. Or if you just need it in black and white because you just need it for the lighting values, I often print them at home if it's small enough to get printed out of my home desktop printer. And that might mean printing 2 or 3 copies. Sometimes I'll print one copy and realize, okay, I adjusted the contrast and the lighting so it looked great on screen, but it didn't print out so great. So you need to go back and adjust it again and print it out again so that you can make sure that the printed copy you've got has the values that you actually want to show in the final product. Well, thanks for watching Starting in the Middle, Episode 1. Join me next time where I talk about how I'm creating a lighting rig to shoot some more photo reference. It's going to be a special light system so you can actually hold some fluorescent tubes in your hand and get some interesting lighting effects.